Hey everybody, welcome to Naturalistics, a podcast dedicated to helping you become a better naturalist. My name is Stefan, here with me is Matt.
What's up?
And today on Naturalistics, our 6th episode, and we're talking about phenology for naturalists.
Yeah.
How's it going, Matt?
Pretty good, you know. We're up in the White Mountains checking out some Alpine Plants, one of my favorite places in the world. It's June in New Hampshire. And the Alpine Plants are blooming up in the mountains, and it's amazing. Check it out if you ever get a chance. Or any Alpine zone where there's like all these little tiny little plants, super colorful.
Yeah.
Really like hardy.
Specialists.
There's something just really magical about that place.
Yeah.
And it's a really harsh environment, but super fun to explore. So we just got back from that. It's fun.
Yeah, it's an annual trip Matt and I have been doing for a few years now, and it's every year around mid to late June. We head on up into the Alpine zone.
Head on up to the Alpine zone. Yeah, I mean,
done it's been different every year, different hikes, and different plants too. So, some of the same characters, but
yeah, diapensia.
Yeah, the ever-present diapensia.
Yeah, so I'm doing well. How about you, Stefan?
I'm doing well too. I feel good. Been really excited about this subject that we're going to discuss today, and looking forward to diving into that. I'm also I want to let you get in here with a little update as far as how things are going with the podcast, and let everybody know what's new and what's coming.
All right, so we've got 2 mics now. I feel like we're continuing to grow up slowly as a podcast. And, so we're excited to continue to grow, have our 6th episode. And we've got a couple different ways to get in contact with us. So we've been pretty bad about letting people know. So we've got a Twitter account now, pretty hard. Like, it's weird being a naturalist and then, like, being on social media sometimes. It's like,
not that you can't do both, but
it is funny sometimes, but we're working hard at it.
It doesn't come naturally.
We really want to get everybody into nature. Really, that's our goal. So, but we have a Twitter account. You can hit us up at Naturalistics _ tweet at us, whatever. Send us your tweets. And
wait. So it's Naturalistics _
That's right.
Okay.
Naturalistics was taken. Maybe we'll find out who it is. And we'll
all right. That's easy to remember, though. _
Yeah, Naturalistics _ at Twitter. And then we've got our email, which is naturalisticspod@gmail.com. So you can shoot us emails. You can send us hate mail, whatever you want, fan mail, whatever you want to call it, anywhere in there. We have our stuff up on SoundCloud right now, and we're going to be going to get onto iTunes soon enough. So, and if you're listening to this in the future, we'll probably, hopefully, on iTunes. So, anyway,
awesome.
So let's get to the listener question, right?
Yeah.
Are we ready
before we dive into phenology? Yeah, we have a question from a listener, which we're excited to talk about.
And that could be you next time. You could send us a question. So we've got a question from Julie. Julie's in Maine, and she says, "Hey guys, love the podcast." Thanks, Julie. I'm wondering about how birds migrate. Do they migrate all at once, as in like long distances all at once, or do they migrate short little bursts, taking breaks along the way? So we're going to try to tackle this one.
All right, Matt. So I have to say the first thing that comes to mind is one of our friends who we're hearing not constantly but pretty regularly while we're up in the high elevations in the White Mountains.
Oh yeah, I know it. Yeah,
and I'm thinking, you know who I'm thinking of, because he and she is famous for the long distance migration.
That's true.
It's the black-poll warbler.
Indeed. Yeah.
And why is the black-poll warbler, like, why do we both know?
Well, I guess
that's
I don't really know why we both know. But I know I do know that I've heard that the black poles they're known for making the long distance trips, sort of like from
it's like Tierra del Fuego, right?
I don't think they do. We should probably find out, but I don't think they do like a Tierra del Fuego.
They don't do the full
nobody does
Antarctic to Arctic.
Nobody does that.
Okay. But they're doing one. It's South America, right?
Okay, wait. Okay. Nobody does that in one shot. But black poles are known. They are known for going, like taking a long trip from the Carolinas to Maine, to Nova Scotia in one shot.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive. And if you ever done any bird banding or anything like that, you'll know that when you catch black poles in the fall or in the spring, or probably down in the Carolinas in the spring, they just have a massive amount of fat.
The fat layer, yeah.
They're just so capable of creating this huge fat layer on their keel, like the breastbone. So you know that's one of the indicators of a long migrator. So yeah, that's one that will take a long leg. And to answer your question, Julie, it depends. If I had to give you one sentence, it depends.
Yeah. Just like different birds build different types of nests,
right.
Have different types of ways of communicating, different songs. They have different ways of migrating.
Yeah, and there's some of the birds, like the blackpoll, will take big legs. And the red knot, I think, is maybe one of the most famous for taking the long legs. I mean, they go from Brazil to Delaware to the Arctic. So they kind of have like a two-leg trip.
Yeah.
And in Delaware, there's, ideally they hit up the
horseshoe crab
egg mass making. And that actually took a while for naturalist scientists to parse out, because their populations were crashing, and they're like, why are they crashing? And then they could figure this out. Oh, they need this food source, so they started to protect the food source. The birds started doing better. It's a cool story.
It's great, yeah.
They are doing better. They're not doing great right now, but they're doing better.
They're not, as I understand it, Matt, they're not like on the increase, but they're
not in the dire
plummeting.
peril where they were. Although, maybe we'll get into this at some other point, but yeah, those Arctic pipers are in trouble for a lot of reasons. But,
so some of the factors that are involved, it seems like, are like fuel. Like if you're going to travel thousands of miles, how are you fueling yourself? Are you stopping in areas where there's a rich food source to keep you going? Yeah. And it seems like a lot of the science around that, especially with the shorebirds, is like when you stop, you have to reach a certain body weight before you move on. So the sooner you can reach that body weight, the sooner you can move on, the sooner you can get to your nesting grounds, the more likely you're going to be to have a successful nesting. Yeah,
and that gets to a really important point about migration, that in the spring, time matters so much.
It's a race,
and it's crazy. It's frenetic. It's crazy. It's like everybody's just rushed. There's a rush to get north, to get to where you're breeding, to find your mate, make your nest, have babies, yada yada. But in the fall, after the season's over, it's kind of, migration becomes this kind of like la la la, like slowly trickling down. Yeah. You'll find it's a lot lazier, and sort of seems to go with the weather far more than the spring migration, which is like much more on the photo period. It seems like that's a real big generalization, but there's but the spring is just that rush. So that's just one element. I'm hoping that helps answer your question, Julie. Do you have anything else to add before we move on?
Well, I think that's neat, and I wonder. You got me thinking about the fall migration. I wonder about black poles in the fall and whether they still do that one shot.
They do.
They do a one shot in the spring and one shot in the fall.
Yeah, as far as I know. I mean, because I did bird banding stuff in the fall where you would catch these black poles and they're just insane amounts of fat compared to the other warblers. I mean, literally 4 times as much fat.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
They need it.
Yeah. So they're taking a long shot. Also, birds migrate at night, just like little known fact. They tend to migrate at night, and the reason why is because they can forage during the day and then fly during the night. Kind of cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of driving across the country and sleeping very little and eating as I'm driving and just needing to get there.
So, anyway, let's move on here.
Well, it's interesting because the question, Matt, is, sort of ties into gaining a better understanding of bird migration can be a result of practice of phenology, right? So it kind of rolls right into our show topic. Definitely
phenology and migration go hand in hand. And if you want to send us a question for the next episode, hit us up on our Twitter, naturalistics_Twitter, or send us an email at naturalisticspod@gmail.com. So, yeah, we can now move on.
All right. Episode 6. Our 6th episode, Matt. Phenology for naturalists. And so first off, I don't want to assume that everyone necessarily has heard the term phenology or let alone knows what it means. So we're going to pull a definition here. This is from a Google search. And phenology is a noun. And it's the study of cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena. So you can see the Latin root there in phenomena. Yeah. Especially in relation to climate and plant and animal life. So the basic definition, study of cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena, that's like what we're working with. And so phenology, simply put, is the study of phenomena, which leads you to another. A lot of people know what phenomena are or what a phenomenon is, and so the definition I have for that is a fact or occurrence observed or observable, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I think that's a really clear way of putting it.
Obscure in some ways. I'm a little confused by that.
Observed or observable. I think that's great because it relates to. It all comes back to like making observations as like a core component of phenology, right?
So you observe a phenomenon.
Yeah. So phenomena are observable. I like that. That's part of the definition.
Yeah.
So anyway, phenomena basically are things that happen. That's the simple. That's my definition. Stuff happens. Like stuff happening. That's phenomena. Yeah. And studying the stuff that happens is phenology, right?
Yeah. In sequential order, or like in a time. There's the timeline aspect of phenology, right?
Right, and that's the cyclic or seasonal nature of it. So.
Yeah. So it's like studying how the order in time that things might occur, like. The order that birds arrive. Like some birds arrive earlier than others. So it's like the study of the order that those things will or the typical aspect or the typical way that things will arrive.
And noticing when it deviates from that typical order, right? Because sometimes certain conditions are met for certain birds to arrive.
Yeah.
In the wrong order, the wrong, quote unquote wrong order for what we're used to seeing,
right?
And so that's some of the cool stuff that you can notice.
Yeah, and and phenology can be a pretty big picture where it's like turtles don't come out before the leaves come out or something like that. Like it's like there's a phenology that you can study that's like an ecology of phenology.
Ooh,
an ecology of phenology.
Another interesting thing that I noticed when I was looking up the definition is there's like this little graph that I think I showed you, Matt, that has it shows like the I think it's the occurrence of the term in I'm assuming literature. Like it's cool. I don't know what all their sourcing is, but I think it's probably like all literature in all English literature. And so it's like the use of the word phenology really didn't get a lot of use for most of history, and then there's like a little bump, a blip almost, not even a spike in like the late 19th century, and then there's sort of like a flat line until the mid 20th century, and then it really starts to ramp up to today where it's actually a pretty commonly used word. And I think that's interesting because it's one of these things where the practice itself predates the term.
Right.
People, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, human beings have been practicing phenology for a long time, since prehistory, I would assert. And the term, is relatively new in...
Oh, yeah. It's a fancy little term.
Yeah.
But it's really useful, really. I mean, there's, and we're going to get into it here, basically. why does this matter? Why do we care which bird arrives when, or, and that maybe that's not your jam as a naturalist. And that's cool too. But every naturalist studies phenology. I mean, it really is one of these things that it kind of encompasses every area of study in natural history.
Yeah. Whatever you have questions about, sooner or later, those questions are going to be relating in some way to
or
phenology.
You're going to need to know some phenology to study the question that you're really interested in. Like, you're going to need to know the timing to get out there at the right time to get to the thing you need to study. So I think that no matter what kind of naturalist you are, you're going to need to have some understanding of phenology, not necessarily in the big picture sense, but whatever species you're studying or location you're in, phenology is going to be important. It's going to be important to know when things are going to be happening. All right, so phenology really, at the end of the day, to me, is a study of seasonality. And in seasonality, you've got two major factors. You've got daylight and you've got temperature. Those are the two. There's a lot of other factors, but those are the major ones, and those are going to affect the timing of things. When critters come out, when plants are blooming, and all this kind of stuff. Overall climatic kind of stuff. So that kind of is important because phenology is more exaggerated in the temperate regions and in the Arctic, right?
The further you move from the equator, the more extreme and apparent the change over time is going to be. Right?
Correct. So in the tropics, there's probably phenology. I haven't spent enough time in the. I've spent some time in the tropics, but I haven't spent enough time in the tropics to really answer that question. But I'm sure there's some amount of phenology. It's
because there are cycles.
Yeah.
And I felt like that's a good point in the definition where it talks about cyclic or seasonal.
Yeah, and seasonal
changes.
can be like humidity. You have rainy seasons and drier seasons in the tropics.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nowhere in the world that's the same every single day year round. I mean, maybe that's actually kind of interesting. I wonder if there is a place.
Listeners, is there anywhere in the world? Maybe you live there.
Maybe you live there. Excuse me.
Yeah, please shoot us an email if you live in that place.
We're fascinated by that. Okay, so anyway, phenology is really great for us in the temperate region, and something we've talked about is that we're kind of biased towards our region, and we're biased towards living in a temperate zone. But we really want to be, at Naturalistics, we want to be thinking about people who naturalize anywhere in the world. We want to have topics that cover any of those areas. But so anyway, we're focusing on phenology, and we got seasonality here that creates this amazing opportunity to study it. Just with winter turning into spring, summer turning into fall, all these seasonal changes are excellent opportunities to ask questions about when things are going to be happening and how to predict it, so forth. And one of the biggest reasons why this study of phenology is really critical these days is this big button word, hot button. You know the word?
Climate change.
Climate change. That's right. Climate change. So it's really it's a polarizing issue, but it's a great time to be a naturalist because the climate is changing rapidly.
I want to jump in here, Matt, and just point out that it's the natural state of things on our planet, and I would probably say in our universe, although I don't have much experience outside of this planet, that things are in flux. That's the natural state of things. Yeah, and so things are changing. So anything you're observing as a naturalist or otherwise, you're not observing a static condition.
Right.
And so it's just the nature of things that they change over time, and due to the accelerated rate of climate change that we're experiencing on this planet right now, the importance and I guess the poignancy of phenology right now, I think, is indicated by the fact that the use of the term has spiked to such an extent, as is evidenced by that graph that I mentioned earlier. So things are changing normally, and right now things in many places of the world are changing rapidly.
Yeah, so important questions are the birds arriving earlier? Are the plants blooming earlier? Are the leaves dropping later? Like, these are really, really interesting questions that have real significance right now. And they give naturalists a certain amount of significance too. People who pay attention to this stuff, people who are writing this stuff down, people who are making these observations. Very important work. It also reminds me of something really important about phenology, which is that you need, to answer any of these questions, a massive sample size. I mean, to really get at these things.
Absolutely.
On a scientific level, yes, massive sample size. But also, if you're just a naturalist in your backyard, you can't say much of anything with a data point of 1. So in other words, if you want to say the birds are arriving earlier, but you've only been watching for 2 years, so the birds came earlier than last year, that's a data point of 1.
And it's not...
Or it's data point of 2, but it's a delta
because you're talking about the change between 2 points. Yeah. It's not... I just want to point out, that's not without value.
No, yes.
But...
Every observation has value.
But the greater amount of data, the greater number of observations that you can amass, the greater the insight that gives you into what it is that you're observing,
right,
what you're paying attention to. So, like, more is better.
Yeah. And that's why, phenology's great because it does have these long-term questions that might be longer than your lifetime. That might take longer than your lifetime to answer. Or it's a great reason to get into naturalizing earlier in your life because, these questions you can get at more of them if you are, if you've been looking for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And there's people that have. Right.
This reminds me, Matt, I think I told you, the blue-gray gnatcatcher thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, I've been birding, I've been birding for like a decade.
Yeah.
And I have always had an easy time, fairly easy time seeing blue-gray gnatcatchers around northern New England. And I was recently birding with an older birder who we were watching some gnatcatchers, and she told me that, in fact, gnatcatchers used to be rare this far north.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's something that has changed
a lot of birds like that.
Over time, but that I didn't know because
you're a whippersnapper.
my experience is limited, right?
Yeah.
So I maybe had jumped to the conclusion that gnatcatchers were a common bird in my area.
Right.
In the summer, right?
And they are a common bird in your area in the summer, but they haven't been.
But they haven't always been. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's super cool. And that's the kind of thing you're not going to be able to look that up. That's an amazing piece of local knowledge that you can't just Google it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe someday. But it's really cool. I mean, it's really, for me, it's an inspiring reason to be a naturalist, is to have that really micro, intimate local knowledge. And it's a great reason to get to know elders, get to know people who have been doing this stuff for a long time.
And that's her sharing the story, right? That's the story from her end.
Oh, yeah.
That's the story element, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's maybe like the curiosity element, or something like that. But from her end,
and the amazing. I mean, how many observations did it take for her to get to that point?
Right, over time, seeing them
and probably
more
talking
and more.
to other people. So anyway, lots of samples. And another thing is, with this climate change stuff, phenology can be really macro. It can be all of North America. It can be the whole world. It can be people study this stuff on a level that we as individuals cannot, which is really cool and awesome. And we love that. That's awesome. We love that stuff. But it's also really cool to study phenology on a micro level, like you're just talking about with the gnatcatcher story.
Yeah.
It could be literally just be your backyard. It could literally just be your road. It could be your town, anything like that. And that's going to be really fun. You kind of want to give yourself some geographic boundaries for that kind of thing. I think that's important. So when do I see the first phoebe in my yard? Mm-hmm. Not when do I see the first phoebe. That's actually a less interesting question. When do I see the first phoebe? Because who knows where you're going to be, unless you never leave a certain area. I think it is important to have some geography to any kind of phenological question.
Yeah, you can be specific with your questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're specific and you feel like you're leaving something out, just ask more questions. Ask a bunch of specific questions.
Yeah, definitely. So And if you want to go macro, I think the best way to do that, like if you want to be thinking about the big questions, are phoebes arriving later or earlier or something like that? You need to start collaborating with other people and getting into and we're going to talk about it later, these phenology groups and resources where you are just one person contributing to like a big data pool. I think it's important to think about it as a micro and a macro study, either way, as a naturalist. And it's also important to remember when you're studying phenology, confounding factors. The world is complex. It changes a lot.
Everything's in flux.
It's very complicated. So it's just important to not use any single factor reasoning, which we talk about, I think we've talked about before, and we will talk about in the future. You don't want to just be like, well, my question is, are the phoebes arriving earlier or later? But there's a confounding factor like the habitat's changing. You want to be thinking about any of those kind of confounding factors.
Somebody got a cat.
That's a good one. Nice. Nature's complicated or complex, right?
Yeah, so, complex.
Complicated is like...
Maybe has like a little bit of a derogatory.
Yeah, I like to use the word complex. So nature's complex, and just like with the large sample sizes, you want to be remembering that, how complicated things can be. Okay,
absolutely.
That's enough of me talking.
All right, so I feel like, that's why it's important. Those are some of the reasons why it's important.
Yeah.
But what does it look like in practice?
Yeah.
This is sort of like how can naturalists use phenology to have good questions, good observations, good stories? How does it tie back into the Triforce? What does it look like? What does the naturalist look like when practicing phenology?
Yeah.
So I have an example of phenology in practice, and it goes. Matt, I've been interested in morels recently.
Recently.
Yeah. Well, it's a perennial thing, right? So when morels are a type of edible mushroom that grows, I think on every continent except Antarctica. I think there's many species. It's a fungi, so it's mysterious, and there's a lot
fungi.
There's a lot that's unknown about this third kingdom.
Maybe we should do an episode on fungi someday.
Oh, it'll happen. Yeah.
I feel so confused already.
Someday. So anyway, yeah, the group of mushrooms known as morels is a common name. The genus Morchella, and they're a really good choice edible mushroom that a lot of people love to eat, and a lot of people find it equally rewarding, if not more so, to hunt for and
big
forage.
Prize.
And one of the reasons why foraging these mushrooms is so important is because they're funky fungi, and they don't necessarily lend themselves to the practice of farming. So some mushrooms, the mushrooms you find in the supermarket, your button mushrooms, your portabella, cremini, these are all varieties of Agaricus bisporus. I think I don't know if that's still the Latin name, but it was, back when I learned it. And that's Agarics are easier to farm, whereas morels are attempts have not met with great success for farming morels. So foraging becomes the way that you get them if you want to see or harvest and taste these cool fungi, and they look really cool. Maybe we'll throw a picture up on the website or something, Matt.
Yeah.
But so while I'm thinking about morels, sometimes I'll go onto the internet and look and see where try and see when to expect them. Where are people finding morels and when? And years ago I found this cool website. Chris Matherly has made this website. The website is morelmushroomhunting.com, so no spaces. And I found it to be a really interesting website, and I was reminded of it in the context of phenology because the way, there's a section of the website which is dedicated to mushroom reports. So people who find mushrooms, and it's, I think it started as morels, but it has expanded to all kinds of different fungi that people will find. They'll record some information like where, when, what trees were present, what other fungi were present, and they'll compile. It's sort of like a form that you fill in when you're filing a mushroom report on this website, and you put that in. Maybe you have a photo. That's often nice, if there's a photo too, especially if you're not sure on ID for certain species. And so all these mushroom reports get collected on the website, and so you begin to see like, morels are fruiting in the south. They as with many things, as the northern hemisphere warms up, it moves from the equator northward.
He's got
towards
amazing
the pole.
maps. I think that's the maps are just so cool. There's some other websites that use maps too.
So he pulls all that information from all those reports together and puts up these monthly maps with all these little data points showing where the morels have been fruiting, and he even kind of divides things up between some of the major recognized groups, or species,
different colors,
and he'll have different colored dots. Anyway, I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in mushrooms.
It's a great example of somebody who really has put the time in to have a phenological study that works.
And so over the years, he's been able to, through recording this stuff and paying attention to this stuff, which is phenology. Whether he calls it that or not, that's what he's doing.
He's studying it.
He's able to then he puts out these videos in the spring when the morel season is going to get going. He'll put out this morel forecast where he talks about whether he thinks it's going to be a good year, where it's going to be a good year, how whether it's going to be an early year, a late year, and all the reasons why. And so because he's been paying attention to this stuff. And from all this input from all these different mushroom hunters that has gathered data over these years, he's able to put together these great forecasts, which are tend to be really accurate. And so it's just a cool thing. And I think one of the interesting points too, Matt, is that there's a real need. Like the whole reason for this whole phenological study, if you will, is that he wants to know where and when these morels are going to fruit, right? Yeah. And he wants to share that with the people who are inputting data.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's like a choice species, so there's a real push to get at that. Yeah, so that's a really cool resource, and just for those of you at home, I mean, just the number one thing we're going to recommend, and I'm hoping we can do a whole episode on this at some point, but journaling. It's kind of like the obvious one. It's just like write it down. Write down when you see what you're seeing.
Oftentimes, it's going to be a year between observations. If you're talking about firsts of the year, it'll be you see your first, and then it's almost a full year, if not more.
And you're usually going to be doing these kind of observations in the spring and the fall. Those are the big times. I mean, there's going to be phenology that happens in the winter and the summer too, or wherever you are. Like there's phenology happening, but the hot spots for phenology are going to be in the spring and the fall.
The sprints, right?
Yep. And you can do any kind of recording. I mean, journaling is just the way that really pops to mind. But I suppose photos could work as long as they're labeled well, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what you really need is location, the species, and the time, and maybe some other factors, whatever else you can get in there, but the location, the species, and what it's doing. I guess if it's like a flower, you want to make sure it's in bloom.
Yeah.
And if it's a bird arrival, you might not need that. And just wanted to mention too here that studying phenology overall can be a little overwhelming. So it's like, I want to study phenology. I'm just going to journal phenology this year and forever. It's like, okay, that's crazy. But what you can do is you can specialize. And this is something we seem to come back to recommending a lot, because nature is just complex, and it can be overwhelming to study this infinitely complex ecosystem of nature. And you might want to hone in on one or two species that you're going to study as phenology. When this specific bird arrives, or when these specific groups have this behavior occur or something like that. And that's going to really help you, for a conservation of energy standpoint, get more out of it, I think.
Yeah, and not feel so overwhelmed that you don't make enough meaningful observations of any one thing.
Yeah.
Like you can spread yourself too thin. And one thing that I would say with regard to specializing is that for naturalists, you'll go down one road.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're never going to go down any of those other roads. Like you're not just boxing yourself in, because you're going to branch out and you're going to maybe this year it's mushrooms, but
follow one curiosity.
And you'll run with that, but then you're going to start another thread, and it's going to be alpine flowers or whatever it is.
And my guess is a lot of these phenology questions are going to come up not because you're like, I want to study phenology. It's going to be like you write stuff down in your journal. And then the next year you write stuff down in your journal and you're like, I wonder when that happened last year. And then you look back. And then that becomes a thing. Yeah. That's how it happens, kind of.
It's really a natural. And
so in some ways, you could be thinking about your journal right now or whatever that is to you, that a recording system for observations. And you're thinking, I wonder if I have any phenology data in there right now.
You probably do.
It's another way to extract questions and observations from what you already are doing as a naturalist, too. One thing that I also wanted to mention for those of us who are lazy naturalists is this idea of event associations, is what we're calling them.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, and it's something that Stefan and I talked about, and we realized that we do it without thinking about it, and it's really what it is that there's certain things in the year that happen every year, no matter what. They're kind of like
you
holidays.
have to file your taxes.
Yeah, exactly. But holidays are great. I mean, Easter's one that comes to mind for me. Sports events, whenever the NBA Finals happens, I'm like, this time, because I watch the NBA, I can say, this is happening right now. And I can know that it might be slightly different than last year. This year's Easter it seemed like the plants were out more than last year's Easter. So there's these events, and maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a student, maybe your work has some kind of celebration day or something like that happens at the same time every year. And that can be a checkpoint sort of for you as a naturalist to be like, it's this day, it's Thanksgiving again, and I want to just check in on this little patch of such and such, or I want to you can start to get these naturalist habits kind of, where you are paying attention to something on these specific days, and that might be your phenology study. And I think that's something that naturally we all do as humans, right? I mean, it's kind of what people talk about at the gas station and around the kitchen table sometimes.
Yeah. Like how many times have you heard remember that April Fool's Day snowstorm? It's like people do it without knowing that, without really knowing that they're associating. The reason why they remembered that snowstorm so clearly was because it, coincided with a date that was memorable. Yeah.
So I do think there's some value to that, to tuning into that more and sort of being more consciously aware of those associations.
And the opportunity there that maybe is untapped.
Totally. The third thing we want to recommend is forming some kind of groups. I think this is just constantly coming up for us, is find people who do naturalizing that you can talk to about this stuff. Stefan's been a great resource for me, a lot of people in my life, but having some kind of group where you can explain and you can have your story, right? Where this can generate some kind of a place for you to share what you're finding, and also to hear what other people are finding too. So, and at work, we have this bird arrival game. We play with each other. Who's going to see the first such and such? And we have a zone. We have a geographic area. And it's kind of it turns into a really fun game, but it's also a really cool phenological study. It's not a scientific study. You wouldn't be able to publish a paper on it.
Yeah, it's not controlled enough.
But it is, but the thing is, enough bad data is good. We won't get into this, but if you have enough, if we do this for 300 years, Just throwing that out there as a number.
There are going to be some clear patterns and changes. Yeah.
That will be so solid. So, anyway.
How solid?
So solid. Anyway, just want to point out that you can have these kind of groups where you're checking in on that kind of stuff. You can make games out of it or whatever you want, which rolls us right into our resource section.
Yeah, we just want to point y'all into the direction of if you're interested in finding a group that you could participate in or contribute, your observations to, that we have a couple of resources that we think are worthwhile to check out. So I think Matt has those.
All right, so I've got one of the big ones is eBird. Really, really popular for birders. Just a place where you can submit your recordings or sightings for anything. Like, it doesn't matter, not necessarily phenology related, but it will show phenology. Mm-hmm. It's something that you can contribute what you're finding to, and you can see what other people are finding. And that's a great one. And they have like migration reports, and they have migration predictions and stuff like that, which is great for you can check it out and know when big waves are coming based on their data and their predictions. So pretty cool. Another one is the U.S. National Phenology Network here in the United States. We've got a cool organization doing that, and they have the need for observers. They're definitely looking for people who are interested in this kind of stuff and want to contribute to questions, the big picture questions that they're asking around changes in arrival dates and blooming dates and stuff like that. So if you want to hit them up, that's the National Phenology Network. Check them out. I think that's it.
Yeah, if there's a question that you have, or if you're look around on the web. There's a lot of phenology stuff out there. It seems like the use of phenology in literature coincides with the number of phenology groups and things. So there's a lot on the web that you can look for. But if you have questions, or if you want help looking finding something that suits you, just send us an email, and that's at naturalisticspod@gmail.com.
At Gmail, and then we've got our Twitter account too. Naturalistics _. So, get at us, send us some questions, and we'll see you on episode 7.
Yeah, and study phenology for fun, but also for naturalist reasons.